I still remember the night when my mind finally broke its silence. The night I realized that my weak memory wasn't a curse, but an untrained instrument. I was sitting alone in my apartment in Boston, the winter wind humming outside the frosted window, English notebooks scattered across my desk like defeated soldiers. I had spent years trying to improve my English fluency, repeating words, watching movies, taking notes, and yet every time I tried to speak, my mind went blank. Words that I'd studied for hours vanished like smoke. I used to blame my brain. Maybe I wasn't smart enough. Maybe I was too old to learn. Until that night, when I stumbled upon a small handwritten note I had left for myself months ago. It said, "You cannot remember what you never noticed." Those 8 words changed my life. That night marked the birth of my journey, the 12 steps that transformed not just my memory, but my entire way of learning, thinking, and living. Step 1. Attention. When I began, I realized how blind I had been. My eyes were open, but my mind was asleep. Every day, we scroll through oceans of information, yet our attention barely touches the surface. I discovered that memory begins not with memorizing, but with noticing. So I started training my attention like a muscle. I stopped multitasking. No more phone buzzing beside my textbook. No more background videos. I looked at every new English word like it was a tiny gem. I whispered it aloud, traced its letters with my pen, imagined it echoing in a quiet room. At first, it felt silly, but soon my mind started to slow down, to actually see. One evening, I read the word serendipity. I closed my eyes and said it softly. Serendipity. I imagined a glowing streetlight, rain falling, a stranger smiling, an unexpected beauty, just like the word's meaning. For the first time, a word didn't escape me. It lived inside me. That's when I understood. Attention is the gateway to memory. To practice, I built a ritual. Every morning, I'd sit with a cup of tea, phone off, notebook open. I'd choose 5 English words, not 10, not 20, just 5, and give them full attention. I'd read them, say them, feel them. Slowly, my brain began to change. I could recall them days later without effort. I started noticing how everything around me could become an English lesson. Signs, labels, conversations. My attention was no longer scattered. It was a beam of light, and memory began to bloom where that light touched. Step 2. Visualization. One night, while reviewing vocabulary, I realized that the brain doesn't remember text. It remembers pictures. The sentence, "The girl walks in the rain," meant nothing until I saw her. A small figure under a red umbrella, puddles glowing under neon light, the rhythmic tap of drops. I began transforming every word into an image. When I studied abundance, I saw a field of golden wheat. Resilience became a tree, bent by wind, but unbroken. Even grammar rules turned into shapes. Past tense felt like footsteps fading behind me. Future tense, like a road stretching into dawn. My notebook changed too. No longer lines of black ink, but a gallery of sketches, colors, and symbols. Visualization rewired my English learning. When I learned idioms like break the ice, I pictured smashing a frozen lake with a smile. When I learned phrasal verbs like look up to, I imagined gazing at a tall, shining figure of inspiration. These mental movies turned abstract ideas into living experiences. My recall skyrocketed. During a conversation, I didn't search for words. I saw pictures, and the words followed naturally. It was cinematic learning. And I, the director of my own mind. But visualization did more than help me remember. It made me feel, which led to the next great revelation. Step 3. Emotional connection. The brain remembers what the heart feels. That simple truth reshaped my learning forever. I used to read English stories passively, but now I read with emotion. If a character was heartbroken, I paused and felt it. If a victory came, I smiled, as if it were mine. Neuroscience says emotion releases chemicals that stamp memory deep into the brain, and I became living proof. One day, I listened to a podcast about a man who lost his job and rebuilt his life through learning. His voice trembled, yet it was full of strength. As I listened, tears rolled down my cheeks, and when he said the word resilient, it burned into my memory like fire. That was when I began attaching emotions to every English word I learned. I didn't just memorize joy. I recalled my childhood laughter on a summer evening. I didn't just learn fear. I remembered standing before an audience for the first time. By giving words feelings, I made them human. And humans remember feelings far longer than facts. In practice, I turned learning into emotional storytelling. When I studied vocabulary lists, I connected each word to a personal moment. Courage reminded me of speaking English in my first public interview, my voice shaking but steady. Gratitude reminded me of the day a stranger helped me when I got lost in New York. I realized that English wasn't just a language, it was a mirror of my life. Every phrase could hold a memory, and every memory could hold a phrase. That emotional layer made me unstoppable. My journal became a fusion of heart and language. Pictures, feelings, reflections. I could feel my brain awakening like soil after rain. Learning English stopped being mechanical and became meaningful. But life wasn't suddenly easy. There were nights I felt exhausted, my mind overflowing with words, my motivation fading. Yet every time I thought about quitting, I remembered the first principle, attention, and how far I'd come simply by noticing. That gave me faith to continue. By the end of the third step, I realized that memory isn't built overnight. It's cultivated like a garden. Attention plants the seed, visualization gives it form, and emotion waters it with meaning. Standing at that point in my journey, I knew the next steps would demand more. Linking, structuring, repeating, but I was ready. That winter, Boston's snow melted into spring, and so did my doubts. My mind had begun its quiet revolution. By the time the lilacs bloomed outside my window, I had discovered something extraordinary. The mind is a web, not a wall. Knowledge doesn't sit in separate boxes. It lives in connections. That realization led me to the next secret. Step 4. Association. One afternoon, I sat in a cafe, studying the word meticulous. I could have repeated it 10 times and forgotten it tomorrow, but instead I asked, what does it remind me of? I pictured my grandmother sewing tiny stitches into a quilt, her hands precise and patient. Meticulous suddenly meant her face, her care, her love. From that day, I made association my constant companion. Every English word became a bridge to something I already knew. Eloquent connected to the first teacher who inspired me. Diligent linked to the smell of early morning coffee during study sessions. Even abstract grammar found anchors. Prepositions became tiny arrows in space. Conjunctions, invisible bridges between thoughts. At first, it felt slow, like carving paths through a forest. But soon, the forest itself began to change. Words found each other. My brain no longer stored information. It wove it. When I heard a new term, it instantly reached out to something familiar, forming invisible threads of meaning. That was when I realized memory isn't about holding. It's about connecting. Association turned my English practice into creativity. I'd take 5 random words: ocean, promise, mirror, time, flame, and build a link. The ocean kept the promise it saw in the mirror of time's flame. It didn't have to make sense. It just had to link. The stranger the connection, the stronger the recall. Within weeks, vocabulary lists that once terrified me became games of imagination. My notebooks filled with mind maps, circles, arrows, colors, stories. Each map was a living network of English and emotion. Step 5. The story method. The next revelation came when I understood that memory loves narrative. Our ancestors didn't have notebooks or apps. They had stories. They remembered entire lineages, rituals, and histories because they were told as journeys: beginning, conflict, climax, resolution. So, I began turning my English learning into stories. When I needed to remember lists, like the 5 senses, I invented a character named Sophie, a painter who could see color, hear music, smell the ocean, taste dreams, and touch the stars. Instantly, the list became unforgettable. When I studied irregular verbs, I made them characters. Go, the restless traveler. See, the quiet observer. Make, the builder of worlds. I wasn't memorizing anymore. I was directing a movie in my mind. One night, I tried to remember 10 difficult adjectives. Instead of drilling, I wrote a tiny adventure where each word appeared as part of a scene. The next morning, I could recall all 10 effortlessly. That was when I understood the deeper truth. Stories give meaning to chaos. When information becomes a journey, the mind follows it willingly. Soon, I started teaching this to my students online. I'd tell them, don't just study, storyify. If you're learning English, imagine you're the hero learning new powers. Each word a key, each rule a weapon. The moment learning feels like storytelling, the brain lights up with curiosity. And curiosity, I discovered, is the fuel of lasting memory. But the brain has another enemy: time. Even the most vivid story fades unless it is revisited. That led me to the next crucial key. Step 6. Spaced repetition. In the beginning, I thought forgetting was failure. Now, I know forgetting is the mind's way of testing commitment. The first time I heard the phrase, spaced repetition, it sounded technical, but in truth, it's poetic. It means meeting what you love again and again until it becomes part of you. So I began scheduling my learning like waves. Day 1, learn. Day 3, review. Day 7, test. Day 15, revive. Each return felt like greeting an old friend. At first, I used apps and calendars, but soon my rhythm became natural. The more I spaced my review, the stronger my recall. My memory stopped being fragile. It became rhythmic, like breathing. To make it more alive, I combined repetition with emotion. Each time I revisited a word, I'd ask, where did we meet last time? Sometimes I remembered the cafe smell, sometimes the morning sun on my desk. These sensory anchors made review joyful. I stopped chasing quantity and started cultivating quality. I saw the forgetting curve chart once, how memory decays without review. And I smiled. That curve wasn't an enemy, it was a map. All I had to do was climb it regularly. So I did. Slowly, English settled into my long-term memory. Words appeared naturally in conversations. Phrases that once slipped away came back uninvited, like melodies from childhood. Spaced repetition also taught me patience, the art of waiting for growth. Learning no longer felt like a race. It felt like gardening. You plant, you water, you revisit, And suddenly, there's bloom. By midsummer, I could feel my brain changing. Focus sharper, recall faster, confidence rising. Attention had taught me to notice. Visualization had taught me to see. Emotion had taught me to feel. Association connected everything. Story gave it rhythm. Spaced repetition anchored it in time. But I sensed there were deeper worlds still hidden inside the mind. Realms where imagination met structure, where thought had architecture. That journey would take me beyond lists and language into the palaces of memory itself. By late August, my tiny Boston apartment had turned into what felt like a living laboratory of the mind. The walls were covered in sticky notes, drawings, and maps of ideas, each one a window into a thought I had once struggled to hold, but could now summon at will. Yet one question kept echoing inside me. If memory is a place in the mind, can I actually walk through it? That question opened the door to one of the oldest and most powerful techniques in human history. Step 7. The Mind Palace. It began one Sunday afternoon when I read about ancient orators who could recite hours of speeches without notes. Their secret wasn't superhuman intelligence. It was the art of spatial memory, the mind palace. The idea sounded almost magical. You imagine a familiar place, fill it with images representing what you want to remember, and then walk through it mentally whenever you need to recall. I decided to try. My palace was my childhood home, a small wooden house by the lake in Vermont. I closed my eyes and walked inside. The front door creaked, just like I remembered. The smell of cinnamon from my mother's kitchen still floated in the air. I placed the first word I wanted to memorize, serendipity, right on the doorstep, shining like a tiny lantern. Inside the living room, I placed resilience as a sturdy oak chair. In the kitchen, gratitude became a glowing cup of tea. Each corner held an idea, an English phrase, a concept, transformed into a tangible object. At first, it felt like play, but when I opened my eyes and tested myself, I could recall every single word perfectly. Not because I had memorized them, but because I had walked through them. That night, I realized memory isn't just mental, it's spatial, sensory, and emotional. The brain loves places. By giving knowledge a location, we give it permanence. Soon, my palace grew. I built a new room for every theme. One for vocabulary, one for idioms, one for motivational quotes, even one for grammar rules. Each space had its own color and mood. My English learning transformed into a cinematic experience. Each time I recalled something, I was walking through my own mind's architecture. The process gave me a deep calm, almost meditative. Learning stopped being stressful and became a peaceful journey through memory halls that belonged to me alone. But the palace taught me another lesson too, that knowledge locked away isn't power. It must be used. That understanding brought me to my next breakthrough. Step 8. Active recall. The biggest lie of traditional learning is that reviewing equals remembering. We read and reread notes thinking we're learning. But in truth, we're only recognizing, not recalling. Real memory comes alive when we retrieve, when we test our brain to rebuild information from within. So, I stopped highlighting and started questioning. Instead of rereading a page, I'd close the book and ask, what do I actually remember? The first few times were humbling. I realized how much I didn't know. But soon, this became exhilarating. Every time I struggled to recall, my brain rewired itself, making the memory stronger. I turned my morning walks into active recall sessions. As I walked through Boston Common, I'd quiz myself aloud. What was yesterday's idiom? What does break the mold mean? Can I use it in a sentence? Passers-by probably thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. I was training my brain like an athlete trains muscle. Then I applied it to English listening practice. After watching a short video, I'd close my eyes and summarize it out loud in English. The effort to reconstruct ideas in my own words burned them into memory. I even started writing mini quizzes for myself. Questions, clues, riddles, turning study into a game. Active recall also healed something deeper in me. It showed me that forgetting isn't failure. It's part of remembering. Each time I reached for a forgotten word and finally retrieved it, I felt a spark of pride. Proof that learning was alive inside me. After weeks of practicing active recall, I noticed something beautiful. I no longer waited for English words to come. They came on their own. My speaking became spontaneous. My listening became sharper. And my confidence, the quiet kind that comes from knowing, not guessing, began to rise. But knowledge shared is knowledge doubled. The final key of this chapter emerged from a simple act: helping others. Step 9. Writing and teaching. I had always kept a journal, but now I began using it differently. I stopped writing only what I learned and started explaining how I learned it, as if I were teaching an invisible student sitting across from me. At first, it was awkward. Then something magical happened. Each time I explained a grammar point or retold a vocabulary story in writing, my own understanding deepened. The act of teaching forced me to organize my thoughts, to fill the gaps I didn't know I had. So, I began sharing small lessons online: blog posts, short podcasts, voice messages to my English learning friends. I didn't pretend to be an expert. I just shared my journey. Yet every time I taught, my brain lit up. The words I explained to others became the words I could never forget. There's a saying: to learn something truly, teach it. I lived that truth. Explaining a concept creates a feedback loop in the brain. We recall, reframe, and reinforce at once. It's memory's highest form of practice. Writing also became a kind of therapy. On tough days, when my focus scattered or motivation dipped, I'd write letters to myself in English, reminding the future me that learning is not about perfection, it's about progress. Those letters became like stepping stones through doubt. Eventually, teaching turned from habit to passion. I realized English wasn't just something I was learning. It was something I could give. I started mentoring a few online students, people from Spain, India, Brazil, and as I guided them through their struggles, I recognized my old self in their eyes. The irony was beautiful. In helping them remember, I remembered who I had become. By autumn, my memory was no longer something I struggled to trust. It was my ally, my creative tool, my quiet strength. I could recall stories, vocabulary, idioms, and even complex ideas effortlessly, not because I had forced them, but because I had lived them. Each step had built upon the last. Attention opened the gate, visualization painted the world, emotion gave it life, association linked it, story structured it, repetition strengthened it. The mind palace gave it home. Active recall made it durable, and teaching made it real. But 3 steps remained. Steps not about gathering knowledge, but about protecting it. Because the truth I learned next was that memory isn't just about what you put in, it's about what you keep out. As autumn painted the city in gold and crimson, I realized that my journey had transformed, not just how I learned, but who I was. My room was tidier, my thoughts calmer, and my confidence stronger. Yet as the year drew toward its end, I faced a new challenge. Not the absence of knowledge, but the noise of everything around it. My mind had become powerful, but the world was still loud. That's when I discovered the final layer of the system. Not just how to build memory, but how to protect it. Step 10. Environment control. One night, I tried to study in my apartment as my phone kept buzzing, notifications lighting the screen like fireflies. My concentration shattered every few minutes. I realized the truth. My environment was shaping my mind more than my willpower ever could. So, I made a decision to design my surroundings for focus. I turned my study corner into a sanctuary. The desk became sacred. Clean, uncluttered, a single notebook, a single cup of tea. I placed a small plant beside my lamp, a living reminder to grow slowly. I silenced my phone and left it in another room. Music became my ally. Soft, ambient tones. No lyrics, just rhythm. I discovered that silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. The more I curated my environment, the more my mind obeyed. My attention sharpened like a lens. When I sat in that space, my brain knew it was time to learn. I realized that memory isn't just biological, it's architectural. Your surroundings become the language your brain listens to. If your desk is chaos, your mind becomes chaos. If your space whispers clarity, your thoughts align. So I began teaching my students to craft focus zones, even if it's just one corner of a room, dedicated to learning. Keep it pure, because consistency in place creates consistency in mind. Over time, I found that even entering that space made my heart quiet, my mind ready. Then, I took environment control beyond the physical. I started managing my digital environment. I cleaned my social feeds, unsubscribed from noise, filled my phone with apps that built rather than broke me. The difference was profound. My mind, once fragmented, began to rest. Focus felt natural again. Yet even with control, I noticed days when my thoughts felt heavy, my memory sluggish, my motivation dim. That's when I realized it wasn't my environment outside. It was the one inside. Step 11. Mental nutrition. The brain is not a machine. It's a living garden. What you feed it determines what it grows. I used to believe that studying longer meant learning better, but fatigue taught me otherwise. There were days I could barely recall a thing, not because I didn't study enough, but because I didn't rest enough. So I began nourishing my mind like I would my body. I improved my sleep. Same hour every night, no screens before bed. I drank more water. I swapped late-night cramming for evening reflection walks. During those walks, I didn't listen to podcasts or music. I listened to silence. I let the lessons settle, the way rain settles dust. I also changed how I consumed information. Instead of binge-watching endless Learn English videos, I chose one topic, absorbed it deeply, and then stopped. The goal wasn't to collect knowledge, but to digest it. My brain began to thank me. Retention improved. Clarity returned. I even looked at my emotional diet. The thoughts I fed myself daily. Negative self-talk, comparison, guilt. They had all been toxins clouding my focus. I started replacing them with compassion. When I forgot something, I said, "That's okay. My brain is rewiring." When I made mistakes, I smiled and whispered, "I'm still learning." It felt strange at first, but slowly, my inner voice turned from critic to coach. Mental nutrition taught me that knowledge is useless in a tired mind. Rest, reflection, and kindness are not luxuries. They are the soil memory grows in. I stopped forcing myself to study through exhaustion. I started listening to my mind. The more I respected its rhythm, the more it rewarded me with focus, joy, and creativity. By winter, I could feel the transformation complete. My memory was sharper, my English fluent, but more than that, my inner life was peaceful. Yet one final step remained, the heartbeat behind all the others. Step 12, purpose. The day I discovered my purpose, it wasn't dramatic. No fireworks, no applause, just quiet realization on a cold morning as I sipped tea by the window. I asked myself, why am I doing all this? Why did I spend months training memory, mastering English, fighting distraction? The answer came softly, because I want to understand people. I want to share stories. I want to help others believe they can learn too. That simple truth changed everything. Purpose turned discipline into devotion. Suddenly, studying wasn't an obligation. It was a form of love. Every new English phrase became a tool to connect hearts. Every memory technique became a way to serve others. I began volunteering to teach English at a local community center. My students came from all walks of life: immigrants, single parents, retirees, each carrying dreams and struggles. I saw my old self in their eyes, nervous, uncertain, hungry to grow. Every time I watched someone light up after remembering a phrase or using a new word correctly, I felt something inside me heal. Teaching them was teaching myself again, reminding me that learning is never solitary. It's shared energy. Purpose gave meaning to every technique I'd mastered. Attention now meant respect for every lesson, every learner. Visualization became empathy. Seeing through others' eyes, emotional connection became compassion. Association became community. Story became legacy. Repetition became resilience. The mind palace became a temple of gratitude. Active recall became courage. The willingness to try again. Teaching became love in motion. Environment control became peace. Mental nutrition became faith. And purpose became life itself. Today, when I sit before my microphone to record a podcast or write a lesson for my everyday English learning audience, I feel that same quiet joy that began years ago on that winter night when I first read those words. You cannot remember what you never noticed. I notice everything now: the wind against the glass, the rhythm of my voice, the heartbeat of meaning behind every English word I speak. And so I tell my listeners, your memory is not weak. It is waiting for your attention, your emotion, your patience, your purpose. Don't fear forgetting. Fear never beginning. Don't chase perfection. Chase connection. Because language is not about words. It's about presence. When you learn with love, every lesson stays. The 12 steps didn't just teach me how to remember. They taught me how to live. They showed me that memory is not a list of facts. It's a reflection of who we are becoming. And I, Emma, once the girl who couldn't remember a single phrase, now carry entire stories inside my heart. Stories that remind me that knowledge is not power until it's shared with kindness. So, to everyone listening, wherever you are, remember this: you already have everything you need to learn. You have a mind that adapts, a heart that feels, and a purpose that waits quietly for you to notice it. When you finally do, your English, your memory, and your life will rise together. Clear, confident, unstoppable. Every word you remember is proof of your growth. Every phrase you learn is a step toward a stronger, more confident you. Your memory isn't weak. It's waiting for your focus, your emotion, and your purpose. Keep practicing, keep believing, and keep noticing. Thank you for joining me in this journey on everyday English learning. If this story inspired you, share it, subscribe, and help others discover their own memory code. Because learning English isn't just about speaking fluently, it's about thinking clearly, living fully, and remembering who you are.